Thanks, thanks, Kalpesh, for making the time for this podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
No problem. Pleasure is all mine. Let's start with a bit of a background about yourself and what you do and how you got into photography.
Yeah, sure. So my background, I guess, is I didn't really get into photography till quite late in my life. I think when I was a younger kid, I used to always take photos on family trips and that sort of stuff. My parents used to give me their camera and I used to take photos, but I never really took anything seriously and never really thought about my photos back then. And then it wasn't until I think university when I really started to look at it a bit more seriously, where I did it as part of my design course. So we had a foundation course where we had photography as part of one of that subject. And so from there, I sort of got a DSLR and started shooting from there. And I was trying to keep up with some of my classmates and see what sort of photos they were taking. And it was just nothing on their level. So I got a little bit discouraged from that and I put it down for a little while. And then I think maybe 4 or 5 years ago, I discovered the work of Joel Meyerowitz, who's a really great street photographer, American street photographer. And one of his photos just sort of sparked something in me that really made me want to pick it up and take it seriously.
Your work as a designer and having photography as a hobby, how does it work? Complement your graphic work?
In a sense, I guess it does. In my design work, I like a minimalist aesthetic. And so I see myself taking photographs with a more minimal approach. But then when I get to like street photography or some other sort of like photography where it becomes a bit more busier, it depends on what I'm really shooting. But for the most part, I try not to mix the two together unless it's like part of the creative outlet that I need to sort of be able to do that. Like if it's a specific conceptual piece where I need to be minimalist, I will do that.
Because why I ask is, I mean, you come from a very multi-dimensional kind of background, right? So
Yeah.
you mentioned that you've done a lot of 3D, not just graphic design, right?
Yeah, yeah. So it's been like I think that foundation course that I was talking about that sort of covered quite a wide range of like topics. You know, we did web design, 3D. There's a lot of team based projects as well, which was quite interesting. We did
Right.
like drawing. So yeah, it's quite a broad range of things.
Have you experimented with conceptual work at all?
In my own time, yes, I do a lot of conceptual work. Like conceptual portraits and stuff is something that I quite like to do. It's just finding the time and like the proper subjects to be able to do conceptual portraits is sometimes a little bit harder.
Right.
So yeah, as much as I can, I'll try and do conceptual pieces. But that's just based on how I'm feeling or if I'm really inspired to do a conceptual piece.
What is it that excites you to go out and shoot? What are the subjects that most attracts you? You know, okay, some people are drawn towards shooting the beaches of Auckland and stuff like that, right? Like
Right, right.
sunrises and sunsets.
In all honesty, for me, I really want to just tell stories with my photos. So
Okay.
if I feel like something will tell a story, I'll generally want to. Like, I'm driven to shoot that. You know, it's for me, photography is more about inspiring people through stories and imagery, and instead of just shooting just because I see something that looks pretty, or something that looks beautiful. I mean, sure, it might look beautiful to me as well, but if it tells a story, I think that's more powerful for me because that's how I sparked my passion for photography is a story. So I want to do the same for other people.
Right. So then how do you go out and shoot? Because it's not like, okay, I have this beautiful beach and the sunrise will be great. So you go out and take that photograph.
Yeah, yeah,
Storytelling is a little bit different, right? So how do you
definitely.
then go out and like you might have some idea in mind, so like shoot something which conveys this kind of emotion or idea.
Yeah,
So how do you go out and execute that or realize that vision that's in your head?
this might be a bit of a surprise, but I don't really think about what I'm shooting at the time for the most part. I will generally carry my camera around with me as much as I can, and I'll shoot what I see. So at the time, if I find something interesting, I'll shoot it. And then it's not really until the post processing or when I'm looking back at my photos is when I start to pick apart stories and things from those photos. it's not I so much go as I'm chasing a story and I want to go and take a photo based on that story. It's more the other way around. I'll find a story within my images. So I
Right.
guess the idea is just always carry a camera around and hope that you find something.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. You always have to have that along with you,
Well,
right?
yeah, if you don't have a camera, you can't get a photo, right? So I mean, even if it's your phone,
Right.
I'm always shooting on my phone sometimes as well. Just getting shots that I find are interesting. So if you've got something on you, most people do these days. It's
Right. Yeah.
really easy to pick it
Yeah.
up.
But do you like stitch a narrative to your stories, or is it just like individual frames, or have
It
you done something like that, like a narrative?
Yeah, well, I recently bought out a book which was from my chipper in Japan, and that was more theme based. It wasn't so much as a narrative, but it's just my like thoughts and processes behind Japan and how I was experiencing Japan. But lately, I have sort of started to flow more towards doing a narrative based series. So putting my photos together with other photos to see how they work. Even using a lot more words in my photographs recently, I feel like that's something I lacked in the past, and I didn't really use words as a tool for help pushing my photos. I know some people say, that photographs speak 1,000 words, but sometimes it is nice to sort of have some sort of textual format to go with those to sort of help drive a photograph.
Right. Yes. Sort of like a photo essay, I suppose.
Almost, yeah, yeah, essentially, yeah, that's right.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it used to be a really popular format back in those days when when you had Life magazine and all that. So
Yeah, that's
they
right.
used to carry a lot of photo essays. So that's how all these Magnum photographers actually got their breaks.
Yeah, yeah. Well, Magnum photographer is a huge inspiration for me. I've got tons of Magnum books, and I always look back at those and just reading the actual essays on those as well is just so inspiring. Like people are able to write. That's something I've never really been too strong at is my writing, and I
Right. Right. So I've been looking at your work. It's somewhat a bit minimalistic, but it's also a bit slice of life as well.
yep. That's pretty accurate. I think my work is very varied. I try not to stick to one type of like photography. I know that like some people have their own styles, and some people do street photography, some people stick with landscapes. I think for me, like photography has always been about being creative and sort of having that sense of creative freedom, and being stuck in one sort of situation or one sort of genre of photography seems quite limiting to me. So I usually try and branch out into all aspects of creativity, not only photography. So it's like design or art. That's the same sort of thing with my photographs. I sort of branch out into all sort of aspects. I don't usually stick to just one genre, and it sort of teaches me to sort of learn how to photograph in just different situations and different elements. Product photography is something that I want to look into getting into, and that's quite challenging for me.
It's right now. I'm guessing it's more natural light
Yeah, natural
driven
light is
photography.
very, yeah, definitely. Natural light is very driven for me. It's like, I think I tend to lean towards natural light. I struggle with studio based lighting, and that's because of my lack of experience, I guess. I've never really had much experience with studio lighting or even ambient lighting at all. So I usually tend to stick with natural lighting. But obviously, that's something I want to look into learning in the near future, definitely.
Yeah, like I recently got a speed light,
Oh,
and
cool.
I went to a photographer friend of mine and I shown, hey, I got this, and he's like, oh boy, that's a whole can of worms now you're gonna open up.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. That must be quite challenging as well. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's so much fun because off late, because of all the other stuff that I do, I don't have time to go take photographs. So I
Yeah.
sort of set up a mini DIY studio in my spare room
Oh, cool.
and started shooting flowers on black,
Yeah, yeah,
using just one light and a modifier, and it's been super fun.
yeah. That's good. That's awesome. So you've just set up your own home studio?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So
Oh,
I'm
cool.
just shooting flowers now. I want to shoot like everyday objects,
Yeah, yeah,
like vegetables and
Nice
fruits,
still life.
stuff
Yeah,
like that.
exactly. That stuff's great. Yeah, I love that sort of stuff as well. So it's just
Yeah, it's so much fun because you learn how to sculpt light
yeah, definitely.
almost, and you can just build upon your shots one after the other, and then go into Photoshop and then put it all together, and
Yeah,
it's just so
yeah.
it's so fascinating.
It's really
So yeah,
fascinating how much light plays a part in photography. It's just that's all it is really. It's just light. You know.
exactly, and also the quality of light as well. The
Mm.
whole concept of inverse square law of light.
Yeah, yeah.
So the weird thing I've noticed is if you actually have to bring the light really close to the subject, then it becomes really soft. But you bring it further apart, it becomes more harsh. It's like
Ah,
it's like
okay. Yeah,
how
that's
does that work?
counterintuitive almost. Yeah,
Yeah,
interesting.
it's kind of crazy, but it's just fascinating to play with just one light and see how it works.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, right. So, what about your influences? You told me that Joel Meyerowitz a big inspiration,
yeah,
right?
definitely. Yeah,
Yeah. So, I mean, his photographs are just legendary.
yeah. One of the
And
greatest.
one of the guests that I talked to, and he was saying, he's somehow managed to have so many things happening at the same time and sort of capture that at the same time.
That's exactly what it is. Yeah, it's just trying to fill the frame as much as possible, and getting a big story out of it, or getting
Right,
little
right,
bits of stories within the frame. It's quite fascinating.
right.
Yeah,
And what about capturing the moment? Because street photography is all about capturing the moment, right? Just like what Henry
yeah.
Cartier-Bresson talks
The
about.
decisive
But
moment.
yeah,
Exactly.
but do you go after catching that moment, or
I
how does it
don't.
work for
I
you?
don't particularly chase the moment. For me, it's just if I'm in the area or if I'm shooting, street photography. If I go out in the streets to shoot street, it'll generally be if I'm lucky enough to see something, I'll take a photo of it. I don't usually go and chase it or go out of my way to find something. It's very much like if the world gives it to me, I'll take it in. I won't I won't go out of my way to sort of force it out of something. Yeah.
Right, right. And the other thing that I noticed in your images is the color palette.
Hmm.
It seems to be very soft, right? I mean, is it intentional?
Yeah, I've always liked muted color palettes. I think that probably plays on some of my design background as well. Where you said before, if design comes into it, now that I think about it, it probably does more than I tend to admit. But yeah, I find very saturated colors and stuff quite jarring on the eyes. And more than late, I've sort of leaned more towards black and white photography as well. It's just sometimes colors can be a bit distracting. And my last book, I did it all in black and white. And I think that really helped tell stories a bit better for me. I find colors can be, yeah, as I said, quite distracting. Like you have a big orange cone somewhere on the side of an image where you've got, something happening on another side, and that orange cone is all you see. You sort of like takes away from everything else.
Eye immediately goes to that, right?
Yeah, yeah. That's why I sort of feel like in post, especially, you can really desaturate your colors, and yeah, the technology we have nowadays is so great to be able to do that with digital photography. So I can pick and choose how I want to sort of have my photos.
Right. So is photography more like a serious, like a hobby art form for you, or is it? Have you started doing it professionally, whether it's commercial or selling prints and so on?
Yeah, well, here's where this like I draw this little white line over like where I put photography for me. There are moments where I've done paid work, but initially when I started photography, it wasn't about that for me. It was more about documenting my life and allowing me to be creative because of telling stories and inspiring others. That was the whole goal for me as a photographer, and that still is my mindset to this day. I don't usually go and chase commercial work or chase paid work. And if I can, I'll try and avoid it, to be honest. Just getting paid work and getting that pressure of having a photography session under a paid situation feels quite tense for me, and I like the ability to not have to be restricted to that. So for me, it's more of a creative outlet and a hobby as anything else. But that's not to say I haven't done paid or professional work, not that I won't, but it's not what I prefer.
It becomes almost like a it becomes a job, right?
That's the
What's
thing. It's like at the end of the day, I've got a job at the end of the day, and I'm happy at that job. And then when I can sort of separate my job and this life, photography life, and use that as my like almost meditative outlet, it kind of helps either like mental mindset as well. Where you can sort of separate the two and not have them sort of intertwined.
right? It just a left of field question. Do you think people should have a hobby? I mean, in these days of lockdowns and sort of uncertainty, do you think having a hobby sort of keeps you more?
Yeah, definitely. I think hobbies help a great deal, especially for like your mental well-being and being able to express yourself in some way, regardless of what it is. Some people play sports or video games, or you've got photography, all sorts of like projects you could do. I think for me, I've never really stopped doing things, and it's always been something quite natural for me to always want to be working on a project or working on some sort of personal endeavor, regardless of what it is. And it's definitely helped me over the years, become a lot more at ease, and you know, being creative is what I like to do.
Right. And I read that you do digital as well as film.
Correct.
But
Yes.
what's your preference?
Lately, it's been digital. Surprisingly, just because of how hard it's been for me to access film, in the sense of I don't really have my film camera anymore, and people shouldn't really know that, but if some people heard that, they would be pretty mad. But yeah, I don't have my film camera anymore. I shoot primarily digital, but I do like film, and I want to get back into film. I used to do the whole darkroom, develop your own film stuff a few years ago, and I loved it. But it also got quite expensive, and I found digital just so much easier and cheaper to run with. But it is definitely not the same as film. There's something that film gives you that it is hard to replicate on digital. But for the time being, it is primarily digital.
Right. And places you like to shoot? Are you primarily an Auckland based photographer, or is that places that you would like to go and shoot?
Oh, there's tons of places I'd love to go and shoot when once lockdown finishes. Yeah, or like once we can leave the country, I'd love to travel a lot more and go see. I'd love to go to the States and definitely do like the whole New York scene and see where all those big street photographers started. Um, but I don't see that happening anytime soon. So I'm generally just stuck with Auckland at the moment. Yeah, I'll tend to go to beaches and stuff like Bethel's Beach, and Auckland's quite nice, and that's usually my go-to when I want to go shoot at a beach or something. But it's honestly just local at the moment.
What's your favorite camera to shoot with? Do you have uh, like any favorites?
Favorite
Like,
camera? At the moment I'm shooting Leica cameras, so I've got a Leica M240 and a Q2. So I'm generally switching between those two. The Q2 is actually a lot nicer for me when I just want to casually take it out on the street and just run with it, and it's a lot more compact. So I usually run with that lately, and it's been quite good.
somehow I feel it's more and more becoming about the camera and not about the photographer.
Yeah, yeah, that's true.
You
It has
know,
become a bit
it's
of like a gear syndrome thing where people want to get the best gear they can to sort of live up to the trends and all that. It in a sense it's about the camera, but then it's not as well. If a camera makes you want to go and shoot, I think it's doing its job. If you enjoy using a camera and it's actually getting use, then I think that's the right camera for you, regardless of what it is. Any camera can do the same sort of jobs. I think, back in the day, you see all these like famous Magnum photographers, like you're saying, they weren't shooting with all these like fancy cameras or like DSLRs that they have nowadays. The technology has increased, exponentially since then. but the quality of photos has sort of stayed, stagnant based on what people can shoot. So I think it's whatever camera you've got on you is probably the best one for you.
Right, right, absolutely. But what about social media? People are forced to go into this sort of silo almost just to fit in.
Right. Yeah.
Somehow I feel it defeats the purpose of getting to photography is to photograph different types of subjects and experiment with it and see where you go with it.
Yeah.
But the algorithm forces you to fit in.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing with like this whole Instagram algorithm stuff. It's changed also throughout the years. From when I started as well, it wasn't as big. Instagram wasn't as big as well, and I think people, you definitely do want to try and fit that mold and have their own sort of style, and then sort of stick with that style. I'm guilty of doing this as well. When I first started as well, it's like I'd shoot for my feed, and if something looks good on my feed, I'll shoot for it. If it doesn't, I won't post it. And so that's a bit of a trap people do fall into, and I think it's just how the social media platforms are run these days, and people are forgetting that it's not always about how many people look at your photos, or what sort of photos you're posting. If it connects with one person, I think that's good enough for a reason to be able to shoot. Or if you're passionate about something, share it and hope that people see it. And again, I'm always going back to people in the old days with like Magnum photographers and stuff. No one had these platforms to share their work, and yet look how big they got, and look how many people they were able to reach just because of them honing their craft and taking the time to look at their photographs as opposed to looking at their feed.
Has your style evolved over the years? You said that you used to guilty of shooting for your feed, but after you sort of snapped out of that and started shooting for yourself,
Yeah.
and how has it evolved? Like, and where do you see it going?
Oh, 100% it's changed. Yeah, when I first started shooting, it was dreadful. I'd try and emulate. The thing I did was I tried to emulate what I saw. And so I'd see a famous photographer, or someone I really liked. I'd be like, I want to do this. So I'd try and copy that style. I'm like, okay, this isn't me though. So a couple of years later, I was like, I really want to do my own thing and sort of stop following trends. And I have the ability to be creative, and I have this like background, and I have my own thought process. And so that sort of made me think, I want to be able to do my own thing, and that sort of drew me away from shooting for the feed and doing my own sort of style and not worrying about that so much. Where I see it in the future, I'm not too sure. I think my style will always change, and that's just based on me changing as a person or me changing my thoughts. It'll be based on how I think and how I'm feeling at the time, I think, is what will really drive my photos.
Great. So, just to close it off, what will be your piece of advice for someone who's starting out? Or
Oh,
what will you tell them? Like, don't get into photography, don't post on Instagram. What will you say?
Well, the thing about Instagram, like I've said, is it is changing. But whether it's Instagram or any sort of social platform, I think posting has definitely helped encourage me to do it more often. And so doing it more often means I'm shooting a lot more as well. So I think my advice would be is if you are wanting to get into photography, is just to shoot as much as you can and try and learn as much as you can. Even if you're not posting, if you are, that's fine. But if you're not, just still shoot and shoot for yourself, not for everyone else all the time. Primarily shoot for yourself first, and if that's something that you are passionate about, you'll find yourself doing quite well.
Great, great, great. So, how can people reach you, Kalpesh? Like, you have a website and
Yeah,
an
yeah.
Instagram?
I've got an Instagram. Kalpesh S Tailor is my Instagram, and just kalpeshtailor.com is my website.
Great, great. That's all I wanted to ask you, Kalpesh.
Awesome, thank
Anything you
you.
wanted to add?
No, that's all. Yeah, thanks so much for having me. It's been an honor.
No problem. Pleasure is all mine. Thanks, Kalpesh, for coming on the show. It was great fun talking to you. And that's a wrap for this episode, my friends. I hope you liked this episode. If you like this podcast and want to show your support, just buy me a coffee. Head over to buymeacoffee.com/photocountry. Appreciate each one of you listening to this podcast. You really keep me going. I will catch you on the next episode. Till then, stay safe and keep clicking.